FSC event for young professionals, and I feel younger already. Because you are the sort of youngest group of people that we host in this building, and I think today we have nearly exceeded our building capacity. I hope nobody is calling building authorities. Of course, our mission here is to promote bilateral ties between Hong Kong and the United States, economic ties, trade, two-way investment, and cultural linkages as well. First of all, about the building that we are in, I think we have bought this something nearly 20 years ago. And of course, we restored it. This is the 19th century Beaux Arts architecture, but we have merged it with the modernity of Hong Kong, and you can see the Hong Kong skyline at your feet. But of course, when this rug was delivered, it was rendered outdated immediately because we always see a few new skyscrapers coming up at our waterfront. So it gets very outdated. I hope we can ask for a refund or something like that. Of course, many of you know that Hong Kong was a British colony, and we were under British rule for 150 years. And in the year 1997, China restored our sovereignty. But under the policy of one country, two systems, Hong Kong people continues to run Hong Kong. So we retain our very distinct identity, that we preserve our economic, our trade, our monetary systems. We have our own systems of laws, and which is more is based on the British common law. We have our own Hong Kong dollar currency, which is linked to the US dollar. And we even have our own passports, which entitle us to travel visa-free to 150 countries. And of course, Hong Kong citizens continue to enjoy a high level of freedoms and rights, which is underpinned by the rule of law and an independent judiciary. Of course, I would say that the best legacy that the British has left behind is the rule of law, independent courts, rights and freedom, and honest, clean, and civil service, and the English language, probably minus the accent. Of course, we are free traders from the start, and that Hong Kong is ranked as the freest economy in the world by the Heritage Foundations for 20 years in a row. And of course, interestingly, we are required by our constitution to be a low-tax economy. So actually, 60% of our working population do not pay a cent of salary tax, and the top band of our salary tax is 15%, 15%. Corporates pays a flat tax, 16.5. Everybody the same, all right? But of course, we don't have the kind of very complicated deductions that you have in this country. Of course, I have heard, and there's no VAT, right? And no capital gains tax, no withholding on dividend or interest, no inheritance tax, and not even duty on wine that we drink. So I can hear some whispers among the audience that you want to be Hong Kong taxpayers. But using the very famous tagline of Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, that with great powers comes great responsibilities. So as Americans, I think you have to put up with that. Of course, we also manage our finances very conservatively. We are also required by our constitutions to run a balanced budget. So we actually have a fiscal reserve, not a fiscal deficit, a fiscal reserve that is equivalent to 35% of our GDP and equivalent to 21 months of government expenditure. So, of course, we have a very stable and robust relationship with the US in terms of trade because we are one of the biggest markets for your products. We are number 9, actually, importers of US, goods made in America. And of course, there is a strong presence of Americans in Hong Kong, 60,000 of them, and 1,300 firms operating, American companies working in Hong Kong. Of course, we have been positioning ourselves as the gateway for American companies to invest in China and in Asia. But in these past few years, we see a very interesting trend whereby some of the very successful mainland companies are using Hong Kong as the base for investment in the US and elsewhere in the world. Because we are a place where we have free movement of capital, whereas there's still a lot of restriction moving money around in China. So it makes perfect sense for companies to move their treasury functions to Hong Kong because you can raise funds, you can borrow from the banks, and move money in and out of Hong Kong very easily. And as a financial center, there are a few interesting developments that is going on. We were number 2 IPO market in 2013. New York was number 1, and we had years where we surpassed New York as the number 1 IPO center. We are the number 2 market in Asia in terms of stock market, in terms of market capitalization. We are also helping China to liberalize its currency, the RMB. And Hong Kong is now the largest offshore center for RMB in the world. And we have the largest pool of liquidity outside of China. Savings and deposits in Hong Kong amount to something like 1 trillion RMB. And of course, companies, including companies in the US, can raise money denominated in the RMB. Of course, now it's still a very US dollar dominated world. Your transaction accounts for something like 40% of the total transaction. And RMB, although it is now the number 7 most traded currency in the world, account for less than 2%. But of course, with China becoming the 2nd largest economy, the largest merchandise trade entity, and the 2nd largest consumption market, we believe that it is going to be big in the next decade. And also a new development that I would like to preview is that we have the Hong Kong stock market as a link up with the Shanghai stock market. And a few months later, a Hong Kong investor in Hong Kong or an international investor in Hong Kong would be able to buy into stocks listed in Shanghai through the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And likewise, mainland investors in the mainland would be able to buy into the Hong Kong stock market, the stocks that is listed in our market, through the Shanghai Stock Exchange. This is a very exciting development because we now see that China is now beginning to open up its capital market, and we are really trying to make use of Hong Kong as the kind of testing ground for them to do so. So this is what we call the Shanghai-Hong Kong Connect. It would be in place a few months later. We're now having the 2 stock exchanges and the 2 regulators talking to each other to make sure that the rules will work. Separately, we are now also investing a lot of money in infrastructural development. We are now building a high-speed rail link that will link ourselves up with the rest of the China high-speed rail network, which travels at around 280 miles an hour. Much faster than a cellar, right? And we are also building a bridge that links up with the western part of the Pearl River Delta. The Pearl River Delta is a very significant entity in itself. It is just the southern part of China with 64 million people. Number 4 trading entity, if you treat it as a trading entity, which exceeds Japan or South Korea or France. So it's a big link up with the one of our biggest hinterland. And of course, we are now building our 3rd runway. I talk about wine because we have no wine duty. It makes Hong Kong a trading hub for wine. and we are now the world's biggest wine auction center, surpassing London and New York. And we have Sir Alex Ferguson, the ex-manager of Manchester United, and Sir Angelo Weber, auctioning their own private collection in Hong Kong rather than in London. So I would also like to stress that Hong Kong is not just a place about making money. We are also investing a lot of money in developing the last prime site, our last waterfront site in Hong Kong, into an arts and culture district that will feature museums, world-class performance venues, galleries, recreation and leisure. And of course,